Mr. Speaker, the approach of today's NDP to climate change has been very poor since the very beginning of their government in 1999. In 2000 and many times since, I have raised the issue of agricultural emissions. But today's NDP failed to take it seriously and address it. Agricultural emissions kept on rising, and they never even came close to meeting their legislated greenhouse gas emissions targets for 2012. Just last week, the Auditor General released a report showing that only 2 of 15 recommendations from December 2010, 4 years ago, have been completed. I asked the Premier, why has today's NDP fallen flat on its face when it comes to addressing climate change?
Mr. Speaker, the economy between the periods of 2000 and 2012 grew by over 37%, 31 to 37%, Mr. Speaker, and emissions were flat in Manitoba. That's a tremendous record. There were more jobs, more people working, and a larger economy, and flat emissions, Mr. Speaker, on greenhouse gas emissions. Why did that happen, Mr. Speaker? First of all, we put an ethanol mandate in place, which reduced the amount of carbons being used by automobiles. We put a biodiesel mandate in place, Mr. Speaker. We brought forward a green buildings policy, so all the new buildings that are supported with government money are now built to a higher standard to increase their energy efficiency and use less consumption of carbon fuels. We put in a geothermal program, which is widely accredited with reducing the bills for Manitobans and reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, Mr. Speaker. We've worked on active transportation initiatives across this province, Mr. Speaker. We brought in a peat moratorium. We brought in the largest landscape of boreal forest being protected anywhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, called Pimatuanaki, the land that gives life. 33,000 square kilometers are being protected, Mr. Speaker. And we've taken additional initiatives to reduce the use of coal in Manitoba.
Order, please. The Honourable First Minister's time on this question has elapsed.
Mr. Speaker, another response which fell flat. Mr. Speaker, December 6, 2011 was a black day in Manitoba history as the Premier announced he was breaking his legislated commitment to reach Kyoto targets by 2012. Today's NDP never set out an adequate plan to address climate change or to mitigate it. Mr. Speaker, greenhouse gas production is at 4.1 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalents above the Kyoto targets. That's 22% above target in the latest report. When will today's NDP complete all 15 recommendations from the 2010 report and quit ignoring their own promises to reduce greenhouse gases?
Speaker, we continue to take initiatives that will not only reduce and maintain our ability to protect the environment in Manitoba, and I'll just enunciate some more of them, Mr. Speaker. We have put more land into protection in terms of the boreal forest. I mentioned Pimatuanaki. We've done additional land in other parts of Manitoba as well. We're protecting water, Mr. Speaker, with the Save Lake Winnipeg plan. We put a moratorium on peat, and we're bringing in new legislation to be proclaimed on that, Mr. Speaker. I mentioned the ethanol mandate. I mentioned the biodiesel mandate. We're investing in infrastructure that reduces greenhouse gases by reducing idling, Mr. Speaker. We've encouraged active transportation around this province, and we're seeing a tremendous boon in active transportation. Right. We're the only province in Canada, Mr. Speaker, that provides 50% of the operating costs for the city of Winnipeg over and above the fares, which allows public transportation to flourish in Manitoba, Mr. Speaker. And we built phase 1 of rapid transit. And I say to the member opposite, every initiative we took in that regard, he voted against it, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier falls short and flat every time. The Canadian prairies are said to be a hot spot for climate change impact, with high levels of flooding in the last 2 decades and the potential for severe droughts. Mitigating climate change impacts is crucial. Yet when Manitoba can be so severely impacted, today's NDP government has still yet not delivered a surface water management plan to mitigate climate change.
Nope.
A plan that I called for in 2000. The trail of broken climate change promises continues for nearly 16 years. Yep. How many more years does today's NDP government need to finally deliver a surface water management plan to address climate change and its impact?
Speaker, I think the member may have missed it, but the Minister of Conservation and Water Stewardship did release a surface water management strategy in Manitoba, Mr. Speaker. That was released, and that is part of an overall plan to manage water in Manitoba. And the member also knows that he voted against mitigation measures for flooding in Manitoba. We spent over $1 billion protecting the Red River Valley and the city of Winnipeg from flooding, Mr. Speaker. That is climate change mitigation, because the biggest threat from climate change in Manitoba is flooding. We spent millions more, $1.25 billion, in the 2011 flood, and we've rebuilt flood protection in cities of Brandon, along the Assiniboine Valley, in southwestern Manitoba. In this budget, we have an individual flood protection initiative worth $25 million, and the member has so far voted against it. When it comes to actually putting your vote where it counts for climate change, the member from River Heights has consistently voted against every single measure in the province of Manitoba which will address climate change, protect Manitoba communities, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is not a proud record, Mr. Speaker.